A judge points at the royal guard standing before him, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "Remove that medal from your uniform immediately." The guard remains still, his eyes fixed forward, refusing to comply. When personal conviction stands against institutional authority, where do we draw the line? Today we unfold the extraordinary story of Captain James Thornton, whose simple cross necklace ignited a legal battle that would expose the limits of authority and the true meaning of honor. Thornton, a decorated veteran with a history of navigating difficult ethical terrain, found himself at a crossroads where his military discipline would be tested in ways his combat experience never prepared him for. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about battles of conviction and honor, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We've got plenty more coming your way. You won't want to miss it. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Lawrence Pembroke's gaze fixed on Captain James Thornton. The royal guard stood at attention, his posture perfect and unwavering, the very picture of military discipline. His ceremonial uniform, pristine red tunic with gold accents, perfectly creased trousers, and gleaming buttons, created a striking contrast against the muted browns and grays of the wood-paneled courtroom. Judge Pembroke leaned forward, his eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. The judge's robe seemed to amplify his authority as he pointed a bony finger directly at Thornton's collar. "Captain Thornton, you will remove that religious symbol immediately," Pembroke's voice carried across the hushed courtroom. "My courtroom maintains strict neutrality in matters of faith. That cross violates our established protocol." The small golden cross caught the light from the tall windows. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, the tension in the room becoming almost tangible as spectators held their breath. "With respect, Your Honor, I cannot comply with that request," Thornton replied, his voice steady and clear. His eyes remained fixed forward, resolved. Judge Pembroke's face flushed slightly at the edges. He was unaccustomed to having his direct orders questioned, especially by a member of the Royal Guard. "Perhaps I wasn't clear, Captain." Pembroke's tone hardened. "This court has established precedents regarding secular spaces. Walsh versus Regional Authority affirmed that officers of the Crown are not exempt from courtroom decorum." The atmosphere grew heavier as Thornton remained motionless, the cross still visible at his collar. A spectator coughed nervously, the sound echoing unnaturally in the silence. "Your Honor, I understand the court's position," Thornton replied with measured calm. "However, I must respectfully maintain my position as well." The judge's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the bench. "Captain Thornton, you are approaching contempt of court. I don't care if you're the Queen's own guardsman. In this courtroom, I am the authority. Remove the religious symbol now, or face the consequences." The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, barely breathing. The bailiff shifted his weight, uncertain if intervention would be necessary. Hours earlier, Thornton had arrived at the courthouse with the morning sun. He stood before a mirror, adjusting his uniform with practiced precision. Before entering the courtroom, he had touched the cross briefly, his eyes closing for just a moment in what appeared to be a private ritual, something deeply personal, beyond simple religious observance. Judge Pembroke's patience had clearly evaporated. "Captain Thornton, you leave me no choice but to issue a formal summons. You will appear before this court in 3 days' time to answer for your insubordination. Until then, you are dismissed from my courtroom." The judge pulled a form from beneath his bench and began writing furiously, the scratch of his pen cutting through the thick silence. Thornton gave a single, crisp nod. "As you wish, Your Honor." As the bailiff approached with the summons, a subtle change passed across Thornton's features, a knowing look that revealed tactical calculation rather than defeat. His jaw relaxed almost imperceptibly, suggesting he had anticipated this very scenario. "This court will not be made a mockery of," Judge Pembroke said, handing the document to the bailiff. "Perhaps 3 days will give you sufficient time to reconsider your position." Thornton accepted the summons with composed dignity. The judge glared down, unaware that he had just challenged an opponent with resources and knowledge he couldn't begin to imagine. "This court is in recess for 15 minutes, Judge Pembroke announced, rising abruptly. As Captain Thornton turned to leave, many realized that what they had witnessed wasn't simply about a religious symbol. The cross clearly held significance beyond what was immediately apparent. Thornton strode down the center aisle, his footsteps measured and confident. Sunlight from the hallway windows caught his profile, revealing not the defeated expression of a man humbled by judicial authority, but the calm calculation of someone with a carefully considered plan. Behind the courthouse doors, away from prying eyes, Captain Thornton's quarters remained quiet and dimly lit. The sunlight through the half-drawn blinds cast stripes across his face as he carefully unfastened his uniform collar. His fingers moved with practiced precision, revealing not just a small gold cross, but also the bronze Victoria Cross attached to it, its crimson ribbon worn but impeccably maintained. Thornton placed the medal in his palm, the weight familiar yet still humbling. The bronze cross, with Queen Victoria's royal cipher in its center, represented the highest recognition for valor in the British Armed Forces. He closed his eyes, and the sterile walls of his quarters dissolved into the scorching heat of Helmand province. 6 years earlier, a younger Captain Thornton moved through rocky terrain, his combat fatigues dust-covered and sweat-stained. His unit of 8 men followed in formation, their boots crunching softly on Afghan soil. The radio crackled with intermittent updates punctuated by static bursts. The acrid smell of cordite hung in the air from earlier skirmishes, and heat waves distorted the horizon as Thornton signaled a halt near a small ridge, his instinct sensing danger in the valley below. The first bullet struck without warning, kicking up dust mere inches from Thornton's foot. Within seconds, the air filled with the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoing off the surrounding rocks. "Contact front! Get down!" Thornton shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as his men scrambled for cover. "Reynolds, suppress left flank! Martinez, with me!" Thornton called out, battlefield instinct taking over. He exposed himself momentarily to direct his unit's response, bullets whizzing uncomfortably close. Through the dust and confusion, he spotted Private Michael Kendrick separated from the main group, clutching his bleeding leg in exposed terrain. "Sir, we've got to hold position until support arrives," his sergeant urged, grabbing Thornton's arm as he began removing his heavy gear. "Tell support to adjust coordinates 3 degrees east when they arrive," Thornton replied. Without hesitation, he sprinted from cover, zigzagging across open ground as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Reaching Kendrick, Thornton found the private clutching a small gold cross necklace. "I've got you, soldier," Thornton assured him, applying a tourniquet before hoisting the man onto his shoulders. The return journey felt endless under intensifying enemy fire. They were 5 meters from cover when Thornton felt the impact in his side. He stumbled but delivered Kendrick to safety before collapsing. His men stabilized both wounded soldiers until evacuation arrived. Weeks later, in a military hospital, Thornton woke to find Kendrick in the neighboring bed. "Sir, they're saying you're getting the Victoria Cross," Kendrick said, voice filled with respect. He pressed his gold cross necklace into Thornton's hand. "I want you to have this. It kept me alive long enough for you to find me." 3 days later, despite the medical team's efforts, the young private didn't survive. The memory faded as Thornton opened his eyes, returning to present reality. The Victoria Cross and Kendrick's Cross rested in his palm, inseparable now, twin symbols of sacrifice and duty. The medal that once represented battlefield courage now embodied his current fight, a battle for principle in courtrooms rather than combat zones. Just as he'd refused to abandon Kendrick under fire, he wouldn't abandon his convictions under legal pressure. He carefully returned the medal to its place beneath his uniform collar and reached for his phone. After a brief conversation with Colonel Hargreaves requesting access to military regulations on religious accommodations, Thornton's expression hardened with resolve. As night fell, he methodically prepared his defense, spreading legal documents across his desk. The medal no longer represented just personal courage or even Kendrick's memory. It had become the centerpiece of a battle between military tradition and judicial authority. With each document he reviewed, the same determination that had carried Kendrick to safety now fueled his legal strategy. The morning sun cast long fingers of light through the Venetian blinds, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air above Thornton's desk. The night's work laid spread before him. Dog-eared legal texts, military regulations tabbed with colored markers, and handwritten notes filling the margins of official documents. His ceremonial guard uniform hung nearby, pressed to perfection, a silent reminder of the dual worlds he inhabited. While most saw a confrontation between a powerful judge and a stubborn guard, the reality was far more calculated. Beneath Captain Thornton's stoic military bearing lay a strategic mind preparing to transform Judge Pembroke's courtroom into a battlefield where legal precedent, not judicial authority, would determine the victor. "He'll see a soldier, but face a barrister," Thornton murmured, organizing his notes by topic. Military jurisdiction, religious accommodation policies, procedural requirements for contempt citations. His strategy was taking shape like a chessboard, each document a piece positioned for maximum effect. Across town, Judge Pembroke sat in his chambers, confidently reviewing the case with his clerk. "It's quite straightforward, Matthews," the judge said, sipping his morning tea. "The guard refused a direct order in my courtroom. I simply cannot allow uniformed personnel to pick and choose which rules they'll follow. It undermines the entire judicial system." "Yes, sir," the young clerk nodded. "Will you be citing the Walsh precedent again?" "Of course, and perhaps Dunham versus Military Commission as well. We'll make an example of this insubordination." The judge closed the folder with smug finality, unaware of the legal hurricane gathering force. Later that morning, Thornton arrived at Colonel Hargreaves' office, his posture impeccable despite the weight of his task. The colonel greeted him with a knowing look. "I pulled the file you requested, Captain," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Your religious accommodation request, approved 3 years ago, specifically authorizing the wearing of your grandfather's cross. All signed and properly filed under Ministry of Defense Directive 1147. Thornton examined the document, his ace in the hole. "Thank you, Colonel. This is precisely what I needed." "The judge is overreaching," Hargreaves remarked. "Military regulations clearly permit religious symbols of minimal size and visibility, provided they don't impede duty performance. Your cross falls well within those parameters." Thornton nodded, tucking the document into his portfolio. "The judge has misapplied civilian precedent to a military matter. He doesn't realize he's stepped onto a legal minefield." The afternoon found Thornton in the law library, his Cambridge law degree, first in his class, called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn, deliberately kept hidden during the initial confrontation. 6 years as legal counsel to the 5th Battalion had prepared him well for this moment. His pen moved methodically across his notepad as he identified key passages from the European Court of Human Rights case that directly contradicted Judge Pembroke's position. As evening approached, Thornton stood before his mirror, his reflection transforming. Gone was the rigid military bearing, replaced by the measured cadence of a seasoned barrister. He practiced his opening statements, objections, and responses. "Your Honor," he said to his reflection, "while I respect this court's authority, I must point out that your summons contains 3 substantive procedural defects that render it invalid under Section 42 of the Courts Act." At his desk, Thornton arranged his documentation in a leather portfolio, the photograph of Private Kendrick, the approved religious accommodation request, highlighted passages from Defense Directive 1147. The night before the hearing, Thornton stood at his window, gazing at the stars. His hand moved to the cross at his neck, feeling its familiar weight. "Tomorrow," he whispered, a quiet promise to Kendrick's memory and to himself. As dawn broke, 2 men prepared for court. Judge Pembroke adjusted his robes with the confidence of a man expecting an easy victory. Meanwhile, Thornton carefully pinned his medals, straightened his uniform, and picked up his portfolio containing the legal gambit that would soon shock the courtroom. The courtroom doors swung open, revealing a scene neither man had anticipated. Every bench filled with spectators, drawn by whispers of the confrontation between military discipline and judicial authority. What these onlookers didn't realize was that they were about to witness a masterclass in legal strategy where the very foundations of the court's power would be questioned. Captain Thornton stood at attention, the contested religious symbol visible at his collar. His posture revealed nothing of the strategy concealed beneath his composure. When Judge Pembroke entered with his confident stride, settling into his chair and arranging his papers with practiced movements, he raised his gaze to find Thornton standing perfectly still before him. "Captain Thornton," Pembroke began, his voice carrying to the farthest corner of the room, "I see you've chosen to continue your defiance of this court's directives." He gestured toward the cross. "Perhaps you misunderstood the gravity of appearing before this court when summoned. This is not a military tribunal where your rank affords you special privilege. Here, all stand equal before the law." "Your Honor," Thornton spoke with measured clarity, "may I approach the bench?" A flicker of surprise crossed Pembroke's face, quickly replaced by satisfaction. He nodded, anticipating contrition. "You may." With each step toward the bench, Thornton's demeanor transformed. The rigid military bearing gave way to something more fluid, the practiced movements of a man comfortable in legal proceedings. This was the moment his preparation would unfold like a carefully orchestrated chess match, each piece now positioned for the decisive move. "Your Honor, I've prepared several documents for your consideration." Thornton's voice adopted the measured cadence of a barrister rather than the clipped precision of a soldier. "First, I present my approved religious accommodation request, signed by Colonel Hargreaves." Judge Pembroke's brow furrowed as he examined the document. The courtroom had grown silent, the rustling of paper unnaturally loud. "Furthermore," Thornton continued, presenting more documents, "military regulations explicitly permit religious symbols meeting specific criteria, with prior approval, as part of the uniform." The judge's expression darkened as Thornton methodically built his case. What had seemed a straightforward matter of courtroom authority was unraveling before everyone present. "Your Honor, civilian courts lack jurisdiction over military uniform compliance. Such matters fall exclusively under military authority, as established in European court precedent." A murmur rippled through the gallery at this complete reversal of power. Judge Pembroke's fingers drummed against his desk, his earlier confidence visibly eroding. "However," Thornton continued, pulling out a final document, "there is a more fundamental issue at hand." He placed a business card on the judge's desk. "This is the summons I received, handwritten by yourself." Judge Pembroke glanced at the card dismissively. "What of it?" "The Courts Act details specific requirements for the proper service of legal documents." Thornton's eyes held the judge's gaze with unwavering intensity. "This method of service does not comply with those requirements. The summons was improperly served, meaning this court lacks the authority to proceed in this matter." Absolute silence fell. The judge wasn't presiding over insubordination. He was watching his authority dissolve through procedural technicality. Pembroke's face flushed as he recognized the trap. He had expected a soldier out of his depth. Instead, he faced a strategist who had anticipated his every move. "Are you suggesting this entire proceeding is invalid?" "I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor," Thornton replied. "The law states it clearly. I've cited the relevant statutes for your consideration." Judge Pembroke reviewed the documents with growing resignation. When he looked up, his expression had changed from irritation to grudging respect. "It appears I need to reconsider the procedural aspects of this case." He studied Thornton's face, seeing not a defiant soldier but a legal mind as sharp as his own. "The court will take a recess to review these materials thoroughly." When Judge Pembroke removed his glasses and set them deliberately beside the documents that had dismantled his authority, the courtroom held its collective breath. Here stood a soldier who had outmaneuvered a judge on legal grounds. Yet the most powerful moment wasn't in his victory, but in what he chose to say after winning. The silence in the courtroom deepened as Judge Pembroke lifted his gaze. His face had lost the hardened certainty that had defined it since the proceedings began. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, a man confronting the humbling realization that his convictions had led him astray. In light of the jurisdictional issues raised and the documentation provided, Judge Pembroke stated, his voice carrying the weight of formal legal language, this court must acknowledge that it has exceeded its proper authority in this matter. The charges are dismissed. The words hung in the air. This was the judicial system correcting itself in real time. The spectators shifted in their seats, witnessing authority acknowledging error with a measured dignity that upheld the court's integrity. Captain Thornton remained standing, his posture still military precise but somehow different. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he stood at ease, the subtle shift in stance visible only to those watching closely. The room expected him to accept the victory with a nod and step away. Instead, he raised his hand slightly. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to make a final statement." Judge Pembroke hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed, Captain." Thornton's fingers moved to the cross at his collar, tracing the worn edges of the metal that had been smoothed by 3 generations of hands. The silver caught the light as his thumb followed the pattern his father and grandfather had traced before him. The gallery leaned forward, drawn by this unexpected vulnerability in a man who had shown nothing but resolute strength. "The symbol I wear represents something deeply personal to me," Thornton began, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner as papers stopped rustling, and even the building's usual creaks seemed to still. "It carries my faith, but also my connection to my grandfather, who died wearing it at Normandy." The courtroom remained motionless as Thornton spoke, not as a legal opponent, but as a man revealing the human truth behind the symbol. He described how the cross had passed from his grandfather to his father, and finally to him, carrying with it family history and a tradition of service. What had begun as a legal confrontation transformed into something more profound, a moment of understanding between 2 men bound by parallel codes of honor and duty. The judge's face softened as he listened to the personal narrative that gave meaning to what he had dismissed as merely a religious token. Thornton continued, explaining how symbols, whether religious icons, military insignia, or judicial robes, carried human stories. The cross at his collar was a tangible connection to those who had served before him, a private reminder of values that guided his service. Judge Pembroke leaned forward, the light catching his forgotten glasses as he said, "Let the record show that Captain James Thornton has acted in full compliance with military regulations. His religious accommodation was properly obtained, and his conduct has been beyond reproach. The court apologizes for the error." As the proceedings concluded, Judge Pembroke stepped down from the bench and approached Captain Thornton. "Captain, might I have a word with you privately before you leave?" The request, offered quietly, suggested a bridge extending between their worlds. The spectators filed out, murmuring about what they had witnessed. It was the rare example of how adversaries could become allies through the simple act of listening beyond positions to the human stories beneath. As Captain Thornton descended the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun caught the medal at his collar. It shimmered like a beacon of promises fulfilled. He paused at the bottom, watching Judge Pembroke exit through a side door. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. The true lesson of the courtroom drama became clear. Real victory lies in standing firmly for principles while finding common ground. Some conflicts require the bridge of human understanding rather than confrontation, revealing the stories behind our symbols, our scars, our devotion to duty. What bridges might they build tomorrow?